It's 4 a.m. in Washington. Your phone lights up. A breaking news banner flashes one sentence that makes your stomach drop. U.S. forces have landed in Greenland. By the time you pour coffee, satellite images are everywhere. You watch American flags go up at key airfields and ports. The map on your screen doesn't look real anymore. But it is. And you're living through the moment it changes. You might be thinking, that can't happen. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark is in NATO. We don't do that. That's what makes this scenario so unsettling. Not because it's likely, but because you can see how fast the world can tilt when power moves first and the paperwork scrambles to catch up. Across the Atlantic, Copenhagen wakes up to chaos. Denmark's prime minister steps in front of cameras, visibly shaken. Emergency meetings begin before sunrise. NATO phones ring non-stop. The United Nations calls an urgent session, and in those first hours, you notice something chilling. Nobody looks ready. Not for the speed, not for the boldness, not for what it implies. In Nuuk, people stand outside government buildings watching the same clips you're watching. Some look confused, some look furious, some look scared, and some are just asking the most human question on Earth. What happens to us now? Because when a major power makes a move, it isn't an abstract headline. It's your job, your school, your rent, your future. Back in the US, the White House press room fills so quickly reporters end up standing in the aisles. Officials speak in careful language. They don't say invasion. They say security operation. They say stability. They say protecting strategic infrastructure. And you can already hear the next line coming. This was necessary. Then the questions hit like punches. If Greenland is secure, why was this done before dawn? If Denmark is our ally, why did it learn from the news like everyone else? If NATO is built on trust, what happens when that trust cracks in public? And here's the part that lands closest to you. This isn't just about ice and distance. It's about the rules that keep the world predictable enough for your paycheck to matter, for gas prices to stay sane, for trade to flow, for your family to feel safe. When the rules bend, everything connected to your life can bend with them. So, in this documentary, we're going to break it down step by step. How the US could even attempt something like this, why Greenland matters more than most Americans realize, and how one dawn landing could reshape global power for decades. Because the map didn't just change on your screen, it changed under your feet, and the next move won't be on an island, it'll be closer to home. You and I have to start with what's already there, because Greenland isn't a blank spot on the map. The United States already operates a major military site in northwest Greenland, Pituffik Space Base, long known to Americans as Thule. It exists because Denmark and the United States have defense agreements that allow U.S. forces to be there, and because Greenland's location matters for tracking activity across the Arctic. So, the U.S. wouldn't be showing up as a complete stranger. The hardware, the runways, the logistics mindset, some of that infrastructure is already in place. If Washington decided to take Greenland anyway, it wouldn't begin with a dramatic speech. It would begin with a quiet plan to control a few key points fast: the main airports, the ports, the communications links, and the routes that connect towns. In a place defined by harsh weather and long distances, you don't need to control every mile of land. You need to control the infrastructure that makes modern life work. One path would be what you could call the legal story. You'd watch a rushed political process built to look legitimate. Sudden promises of investment, heavy pressure on local leaders, and a fast vote framed as self-determination. The message would be simple. Greenlanders are choosing a new status, and the United States is helping. On paper, it would be sold as consent. In reality, it would be consent shaped by power, money, and the quiet fear of what happens next. The other path would be a fait accompli, a move so fast that everyone spends the first days arguing over wording, while the situation on the ground becomes hard to reverse. You'd see U.S. forces secure runways and fuel depots, take control of air traffic and cargo flow, and set checkpoints around critical facilities. The goal would be to make the new reality feel permanent before Denmark, NATO, or the UN can coordinate a response that actually changes facts on the ground. And here's the hard truth you and I have to face. Under modern international law, taking territory by force is broadly prohibited. The UN system is built on the idea that borders aren't supposed to change just because a stronger country decides they should. So a US seizure wouldn't look like a normal policy dispute. It would look like a direct challenge to the post-1945 order the United States helped build. Denmark's limitations would become obvious immediately. Denmark is capable, but its military is small compared with the United States. And it depends on NATO's collective defense. That creates an immediate political shock. If the strongest member is the one creating the crisis, what can the alliance even do? Denmark can protest, demand withdrawal, call emergency meetings. It can push sanctions, legal action, and diplomatic isolation. But none of that puts a runway back under Danish control if it's already secured and running. So you'd watch leaders hesitate. Not because they don't care, but because every option carries risk. Push too hard and the alliance fractures. Push too softly and the new map becomes normal. And while officials debate, the real leverage becomes brutally clear. Whoever controls the airports and ports controls the future. What was improved? I tightened the pacing and phrasing for smoother narration, sharpened the two-path structure, and made the stakes and logic feel more immediate and believable while keeping your meaning intact. If you and I look at Greenland on a classroom map, it can feel like empty space. But for the United States, Greenland isn't far away. It sits on the shortest path between North America and Europe, and it borders Arctic skies and seas that matter more every year. That's why Greenland keeps showing up in US planning, even when most Americans aren't paying attention. First, there's the military value. In national defense, time is everything. In the Arctic, routes between major powers run over the top of the world. That's one reason the United States has long leaned on early warning and tracking systems in the far north. Greenland's location helps monitor activity that could cross the Arctic, and it supports communications and space-related missions. It also gives the US a strong position for aircraft operations in the North Atlantic, and access to routes that can support search and rescue and security missions in extreme conditions. Then there's the sea. As Arctic ice changes over time, the region becomes more active, more ships, more research, more commercial interest, and more competition over who sets the rules. Greenland sits near key approaches between the Atlantic and the Arctic. If you control or strongly influence critical points in that region, you can shape who operates there, how safely they operate, and how quickly help can arrive when something goes wrong. For a superpower, that kind of positioning isn't a luxury. It's an advantage that can decide outcomes before a crisis even starts. Next, resources. Greenland is known to have valuable minerals, including some used in modern technology and defense systems. When Americans talk about supply chains, they usually picture factories and cargo ships. But it starts earlier than that. It starts with raw materials for electronics, batteries, advanced components, and other high-value manufacturing. If a country can secure reliable access to strategic minerals, it reduces its exposure to disruptions and price shocks. That affects defense, but it also affects jobs, industry, and the cost of the technology you buy. People also talk about oil and gas potential in the broader Arctic region. Those projects face big hurdles: cost, weather, environmental risk, and politics. Still, even the possibility matters in long-term strategy, because energy shapes planning and influence over time. Now, connect all of this to your daily life. When the US cares about a place like Greenland, it isn't about the flag on a map. It's because territory can act like a platform for sensors, runways, ports, satellites, cables, shipping lanes, and resource access. In the 21st century, value isn't just farmland and big cities. Value is position, connectivity, control of key systems, and that's why Greenland matters. It's a lever. It can reduce warning time, expand reach across the Arctic, and strengthen America's hand in a region where the rules are still being written. If you want to understand why a major power would take risks over a place most people will never visit, start here. Greenland changes the geometry of power. And when the geometry changes, everyone else has to adjust, including you. The moment the United States takes control of Greenland, you and I would feel the shock not just on maps, but in the relationships that normally keep the world steady. NATO would face its biggest trust test in modern memory. The alliance is built on a simple idea. If one member is threatened, the others stand together. But if the strongest member is the one changing an ally's territory, every smaller country starts asking the same question. First in private, then out loud. If rules can bend for a friend, what do they mean for me? You'd see emergency meetings, careful statements, and a new kind of fear. The fear of uncertainty inside a system that survives on predictability. Across Europe, the political reaction would spread fast. Some leaders would demand harsh consequences. Others would push for dialogue, terrified that the alliance could fracture. But even the calmest voices would start planning for a future where Europe relies less on Washington. You'd hear more talk about defense autonomy, more funding for European industry, and more pressure to build independent command structures. That shift wouldn't happen overnight, but the direction would change. And when Europe's strategy changes, America's costs change too, because you can't lead an alliance that trusts you less without spending more effort, more time, and often more money. Then you and I would watch Russia and China respond, not because Greenland is the prize, but because the precedent is. Moscow would say, "See, the rules were never neutral," and use America's move to justify its own hard positions near its borders. Beijing would take a different approach. It would avoid direct confrontation at first and expand influence through economics, research, shipping, and diplomatic outreach. China has already signaled Arctic ambitions over the years, and a sudden crisis would give it a reason to deepen ties with European partners and present itself as the stable alternative. The result is a colder, more competitive world where every decision starts to feel like part of a larger contest. Now, bring it down to ordinary people, because that's where this becomes real. For Greenlanders, daily life would change in ways that look small at first and then turn permanent. New rules at airports and ports, new security zones near key facilities, debates over citizenship, local autonomy, and which laws apply. Some people might benefit from jobs and investment. Others would worry about cultural pressure, higher prices, housing strain, and damage to land and fishing areas. In small communities, even a few large projects can reshape everything: work, language, politics, and the feeling of home. And for you as an American, the costs show up through bills and risks you can't ignore. Holding distant territory is expensive. Logistics, construction, personnel, equipment, and constant transport in brutal conditions. That means higher federal spending and harder trade-offs, because every new commitment competes with needs at home. You'd also see global tension rise, and tension has a way of leaking into markets. Fuel costs, shipping insurance, supply chains. And you'd feel the strain on U.S. diplomacy, because every negotiation would now start with a question other countries can't unsee. Will the United States follow the rules when it's inconvenient? So the fallout isn't just headlines. It's a new world where alliances feel thinner, rivals feel bolder, and ordinary people, Greenlanders and Americans, carry the weight of decisions made far above them. And once trust breaks, you and I know the hardest part. It doesn't snap back into place.